We thank you so much for your time and appreciate your support of our coffee and collaborations. JoAnn?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for that nice introduction, Jennifer. I will say that this is the first time I've done this, so it's kind of a little bit disconcerting to see my face over on the side, but and I'm a bit intimidated, too, knowing some of the other great people that you've had as speakers. But I will do my best, and I think it's an interesting topic, and hopefully you'll have some questions, and we'll enjoy and maybe learn a little bit, too. So a bit about me. I think probably most of you know me. I've been doing this a long time. I'm presently CEO of my own company as a freelancer and have been doing that since September. Worked from my home for a long, more than 30 years, which has been wonderful, and only because of the trust that my employers provided for me. I was one of the first to work from home, and it was tough to ask for that, being able to work from home, but fortunately they went along with it, and it's worked out pretty well. So my clients include animal health companies, some feed companies, and some genetics companies, and I'm trying to balance the whole work-life thing in retirement, so we'll see how that goes. Been an active member of AAEA, not as much in LPC, but hopefully can do some of that in the future. So our topic, it was funny because before we started, I was visiting with Angie and Jennifer if they knew what the term get fresh, or if someone gets fresh with you, if they knew what that meant. And they were thinking of kind of the whole milk program and talking about, got milk. And no, it's not like that. In my day, it used to mean if somebody said something that was kind of flirty or, not maybe controversial in a way, or they were just kind of not necessarily inappropriate, but they said something where you'd say, well, he got fresh with me. So that's what I was meaning with kind of a play on words, but it's a good point not be outside of the comfort zone of your readers. You say something like that, you need to make sure that they understand what you're talking about. But in my industry, I've worked in the pork industry for a long, long time, so we've got a number of recurring issues. Porcine respiratory and reproductive syndrome, African swine fever, swine influenza, animal rights activists. So these are topics that we revisit over and over again. And in your industries, I'm sure you have the same thing. I visited with Greg Henderson last night, and he was saying bovine respiratory disease is something that he's been writing about for all of the years that he's been an editor, and it's something that researchers tell him is always going to be an issue. So then it's a matter of how can we make something fresh and interesting to our readers. So you've got the same stories, and what you want to do, of course, is to provide a new perspective so that you can bring into your article and have them read it. So it's a matter of making it fresh for your readers every single time, even though it's a topic that you've revisited more than once. So here's an example, and these are not all my stories. You'll see some of Jennifer's here too, but when we're talking about African swine fever, which if you aren't familiar with that, it's a disease that we don't have in the United States, and we're doing all that we can to keep it out of the United States. But it's spreading very quickly across China. It's in some countries in Europe, and so it's top of mind for U.S. producers, because if it were to hit this country, it would basically devastate the U.S. pork industry. It doesn't affect people, but it causes, yes?
I don't think your slides are forwarding. We're still on the first slide. Have you been forwarding them? I'm sorry.
Yep, I have been. So how do I change it?
So you're seeing the news. Okay, now we can see it like the display mode. Or if you want to try to put it back into. There you go. Now it says how many ways, and it shows like. Okay.
All right. I don't think I need to go back. I had some kind of nice pictures on it, but I think we'll just start with this, if that's all right. Or would you like me to go over those other slides? Yep, we're good. So in talking about African swine fever, these are just some of the stories that we've done on Farm Journal's Pork, and that now Jennifer has taken up this mantle and is carrying it forward as well. But when it was first found in China, you'll see on the top left, and then it was discovered in Romania. And then we took a different approach. Sarah Brown wrote an article about how the WH group, which is the owner of Smithfield, they're restricting transport due to African swine fever. Then the next one was about the German, an expert in Germany who's talking about the fact that ASF is a human-driven disease, meaning very quickly by people. At the top right, China is banning pig farming in areas inhabited by wild boars because they know that the wild boar population is a huge carrier of ASF. And then about Poland lifting its restrictions on pork imports, and top Russian pork producer reporting an ASF outbreak. So you can see how it's a continuing story, and it's how can we make that fresh for our readers each time. Oh, I didn't know it was going to do that. So one thing that Greg and I talked about was about the sources, of using either news sources or something that I've talked about with Jennifer and others is, how can we find new sources, up-and-coming sources? Is there maybe it's a grad student, or maybe it's somebody who just took a job at a university, or maybe it's someone from another country. What can we do to bring that fresh perspective? How has the virus changed, or how has the situation with a disease or with whatever it is you're reporting about, how has that changed? What new can you bring to that story? For example, on ASF, they're working on a vaccine. There is no vaccine at the present time, but in talking about how are researchers working toward a vaccine and what are some of the problems or issues that they're dealing with on that. Revisit a frequent source and ask different questions. Try to bring in a new perspective that way and see what's changed. And Greg had said, it's a different impact than you might have previously reported because things are always changing with new information, with new technology. So what can you bring to the top on anything that's new about that topic you're covering? This is an example. If someone said something fresh to you, you might slap them across the face. Well, you can't do either one of those things anymore, but taking an old topic and making it new again is what is our goal for everyone. So when you're thinking fresh, what if this were the first time? You might have some readers who maybe missed some of those earlier stories. So trying to put yourself in that position, and I think throughout my career, that's what I've tried to do, is think like my readers. And having been in the pork industry and raising pigs, that was easier for me because I kind of had an idea of how they thought. And many of you, too, grew up on farms, and so you know that. Even if you don't, having that ability to think like your readers can make all the difference. And what would you want to know that hasn't already been said about a particular topic? What's changed? So it's just stepping back away from it sometimes can give you that perspective that you need to look at an issue completely differently than you have before. So today we're going to talk primarily about headlines, photos, and leads as a way to make a topic that you've covered before fresh again. So we'll kind of talk about headlines first. And this was one that we did about the new technologies, the CRISPR technology. And the CRISPR tied in with bacon, because bacon is crisp. So this was a headline that we used for this particular story. I like to bounce ideas off of other people. I'll tell you kind of a funny story from a long time ago when I was with Farm Progress. We had done a researcher had sent a press release about the fact that they knew boars performed better if there was music playing in the background. We had kind of an inner office contest to come up with headlines, most of which could not be used, but it did give us a way to kind of think about it a little bit differently. I like to use humor when it's appropriate as a way to kind of be catchy and to get people's attention. And consider alliteration, not too much of it, but I think that works pretty well for headlines as well. I like to keep headlines, 5 words or less if possible. Sometimes you can't, and sometimes you do need to provide more description in your headline, but I think it's better if it's shorter. And try to relate it to your audience. Of course, that's kind of a given. But this story and the previous one I showed you, they got really good readership, and I think part of it was just because of that headline. They wanted to know, okay, what is this about? And it was about a student actually at University of Iowa who had developed this belt that would go around a sow's kind of around her chest, and if she laid down and there was a pig underneath her, and the vibration of the pig squealing would cause the sow to get a mild electric vibration, and so she would stand up. And so this is something that is still being researched, but I thought it was pretty interesting, and that was a good way to kind of put it from the pig's perspective. You want to make the reader wonder, but not too much. You want to give them enough of an idea that it entices them to want to read more. And this particular cover, there's things that I would change on it now, but it was these officers, both of them are police officers, and one was on duty, so I only had a limited amount of time. And it was a local policeman who said that he would work with me. But this story that was back in the 90s was when methamphetamine was just becoming an issue in the Midwest. And they were using anhydrous to make it, so it was before the tanks were locked. And this was a series of articles that we did about methamphetamine in the heartland. So for this particular one, that it was a new topic, but we tried to look at it from as many different viewpoints as we could. We actually interviewed a young woman who had grown up on a farm, and she had gotten involved with meth and, just talked about her journey. We talked to psychologists and healthcare workers about what they were seeing in the cases that they dealt with. We talked about how it was affecting rural communities, and it actually led to Senator Grassley mentioning it in a press conference, and it eventually led to getting locks on anhydrous tanks. So those are the kinds of things that as you know, you've got tremendous power in what you're doing. So it's a chance for you to really make a difference. Lots of things, this picture might have been better if it'd been in a sepia or maybe even black and white to make it more stark. And the headline lets you know that there's something going on, but we didn't actually mention methamphetamine in the headline. We just had it in the deck. So there's different ways that you can present things. And please know that I'm not saying that I'm doing all of these great things, because for every great story I have, there's probably some that, I'm not as proud of, but we work within the constraints that we have, right? Before we get to leads, I wanted to give you a couple of the headlines that I have done in the past, just to give you an idea. And again, they're just examples. One of the ones that has really taken off, and we reran it like every other year because we'd always get such good comments on it, was Confessions of a 4-H Mother. So that makes anyone who's been a 4-H mother knows, okay, there's got to be some confessions in there because they have them as well. And great comments back on that. We had one headline that was Pot-Bellied Pigs, a Hurricane, and Puerto Rico. So, you want to know, or hopefully the reader wants to know, how you can tie those 3 things in together. The problem with polls, I liked the alliteration in that, and was just trying to explain to people about how you have to look at polls more closely. You can't just take them at face value because they can be swayed in a lot of different ways. Know thy neighbors or meet their lawyers. Maybe just know thy neighbors would be enough for that, but it's just talking about how farmers need to stay in touch with their neighbors and keep those good relations, because as we saw in North Carolina, things can go terribly wrong. Consumers need the truth, and here's why. Your emotional support animal could be my nightmare. I'd read an article about animals that were going on planes, and there was actually a lady out in California who did kind of a social experiment by renting a snake and a llama and a goat and some other animals to get them on a plane. So I was just talking about how sometimes, someone's allergic to a dog or cat and happens to be sitting next to them. It can be not a very good thing. Shine a light on your farm, pretty obvious on that. If you see it, stop it, for animals and people. And on that one, I think it was important to add the for animals and people so that they knew that you were talking about, if there was abuse on a farm, you needed to be reporting it right away. The Vegetarian's Dilemma, and one of my favorites, electric pig manure. And it was about using hog manure in North Carolina to power for energy. So those are just a couple of examples. And, taking that time when you first know that you're going to be writing a story to think about, how you want to present it or how you can make it interesting to your audience. Okay, so we'll move on to leads. And basically there are two kinds of leads. There's the kind that sums up the situation succinctly and gives readers the facts first, who, what, where, when, how, why, and determining in your mind what you feel is going to be most important to your reader. So here's a good example. An alleged virgin gave birth to a son in a barn just outside of Bethlehem last night, claiming a celestial body guided them to the site. Magi attending the birth, said the boy will one day be king. Herod has not commented, and maybe that's how, if Jesus had been born in modern day, how that story might have been depicted. So these are my favorite, the leads that are creative or descriptive. You can use an anecdote, an observation, a quirky fact or a funny story, thinking, again, stepping back away from your story and thinking about what's going to be most interesting to your audience. It's obviously better suited for feature stories and blog posts, and you want to pique the reader's curiosity and draw them into the story in as many ways as you can. And if you go this route, you want to provide broader detail or context right after that lead so that they know what the story is going to be about, and you don't leave them hanging too long. And with creative leads, you don't want to make your reader hunt too long for what the story is about, as I just said. So here's one that I really liked. It might be a little bit long, but I wanted to set the tone first for the type of person that this gentleman was, and kind of slow talking and just very much a Southern gentleman, and creating the scene for where he was and what he did. The Great Smoky Mountains are known for the trail leading to Chimney Tops Peak, the cool sprays from Grotto and Laurel Falls, and the solitude of the iconic fog as it rolls in over valleys. Encyclopedias say the name Smoky comes from the natural fog that often hangs over the range and appears as large smoke plumes from a distance. Maybe, in reality, it's coming from one of two smokehouses at Alan Benton's Smoky Mountain Country Hams. So hopefully it sets the scene without being boring. It might be a little bit long. You can use your own judgment on that, but I just really wanted to kind of put him in his own environment. So here are some top 10 do's on leads, and I found an article that I thought was just really good, so this has kind of been modified from an article on clearvoice.com by Megan Krause. So first, determine your hook. As we talked about a little bit, the 5 W's and the 1 H, and why are readers clicking on this content? What problem are they trying to solve? What's new or different? And determining which aspects are most relevant and important with a lead that helps show that. So again, thinking like a reader. Be clear and succinct. Simple language is best. Many of you know the Mark Twain saying, don't use a $5 word when a 50-cent word will do. I think that's good advice for all of us. Write in an active voice. Use strong verbs and decided language. So think about dog bites man to a man was bitten by a dog. Which one would you rather read? The passive voice is considered timid and bland. Address the reader as you, and this may be determined by the company or the organization with whom you work. That may not be appropriate in yours, but I like to use it, especially in blogs or in editorials. I think it's a way to connect with your reader more effectively. It's what Megan said was, this is the writer's equivalent to breaking the fourth wall in theater, and while some editors will disagree, I think it works, and I agree with her on that too. People will know when you're writing to them. And fifth, put attribution second. What's the nugget? What's the little gem that you're trying to impart? And put that information first, and then follow it up with who said it. The according to part is almost always secondary to what he or she actually said. Go short and punchy. It makes the reader want to know where you're going and what you're going to do when you get there. And if you're stuck, find a relevant stat. Sometimes starting with a statistic that applies to your article can be a really effective way to bring the reader in. And it's especially effective if the stat is unusual or unexpected, as in a whopping 80% of Americans are in debt. I'm to the age now where I get the ARP newsletter, and that's the kind of headlines that they do often, is how many people have not saved in their retirement. And it's, that's the story that I want to read, because I'm thinking, how did that happen? But it's easy to see how it can. Or start with a story. If beginning with a stat or a fact isn't working for your lead, try leading with an anecdote instead. People absorb data, but they feel stories. Here's an example. It's just after 11 p.m., and Houston police officer Al Leonard has his gun drawn as the elderly black man approaches the patrol car. The 9mm pistol is out of sight, pointing through the car door. Leonard rolls down his window and casually greets the man. What can I do for you? You want to know what happens next, right? Borrow a literary tactic. So every good story has these three elements: a hero we relate to, a challenge or a villain we fear, and an ensuing struggle. Find these elements in the story you're writing and lead with one of these. I think that's really good for those of us in agriculture, especially because we might think, okay, it's another research study, it's another, story on ASF, it's another story on respiratory disease in cattle. How can you make that fresh? I think that's a really good piece of advice. And when you're staring at a blank screen, what Megan Krause suggests is that you just start writing. You might start in the middle. You might start at the end of your story. Just start jotting down notes. And it's kind of like when I was working on this PowerPoint, I thought, okay, I'm not even sure I know where to start, but I took some other ideas from some other presentations that had been done before, and as I started into that, I thought, okay, this is how I feel about that, and kind of added in my own take until it finally became my own presentation. So what she says is, once you begin, you can usually find your lead buried a few paragraphs down in this get-going copy. Your lead is there, you just need to cut away the other stuff first. Years ago, when I was just starting out in my career, I had an editor who, I was really proud of this story. I thought this was a brilliant story, so I gave it to him, and it came back, and it was just marked up with red everywhere. And he had done just that. He'd taken my third paragraph and suggested that I move it up to the top, and I can't believe how much better that article was after he got done with it. So, be willing to put yourself out there and get feedback from other people. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. So you had a presentation by Steve Werbelow, who is an editor and photographer who I greatly admire, and he gave a talk on walk around the story and tactics, and so I tried to apply that to ASF. Getting experts from other countries and taking that broad view. I heard a researcher at the U.S. Animal Health Association meeting who had talked about Spain, and they're working on a vaccine there and how they were able to get rid of ASF. Those are things that our audience would be very interested in. You know, what would be the impact if the U.S. were to get ASF? Talk to economists. You know, there's a lot of good ones in your industries too, but ask a question that maybe they haven't been asked before that's more specific. What about animal rights proponents? You know, we're going to have to destroy thousands and thousands of animals. What's their take on that? That might be of interest to your audience. And producers, you know, maybe there's someone in another country that you can get in touch with, and how did they deal with it? You know, how did they feel about it? I know sometimes if there's been a disaster of some kind and you talk to those farmers, what they're most sad about is the fact that they've lost animals that they care about. And you want to get that emotional feeling from yourself to your readers. And maybe you take an animal's perspective. I know that Steve had mentioned that too, and I've read a couple of really good articles that it was from a pig's point of view. So maybe you, as an example, so 3323 was supposed to join the sow herd, but not anymore. So, and then you follow her path from, you know, when the disease first enters a herd to what might happen. Wouldn't have to be on ASF, but I think you kind of get the idea of what I'm talking about. And you can expand or look beyond the article too. Of course, we're all writing for multimedia. We're all doing a lot of different things, great ways to embed audio or video into your article. Maybe you didn't do that the first time. Maybe there wasn't enough information available to do it. But adding infographics or maps, podcasts, social media, slideshows, you know, we've been using some of those, and I think it's something new for our readers to try to click on those and go through them, but it's kind of a new way to present information. I like to do timelines, and I think with a disease like ASF, that's something, okay, you can give them a review through a timeline without revisiting it in your whole story. And of course, audio and video is going to add more interest to the story as well. So personally, when you think about how you can stay fresh in how you write, not about your story, but how you as an editor, as a writer, can stay fresh, these are things that Greg and I talked about last night. You know, feed your soul regularly. Read good writing. It was funny because he had mentioned Sports Illustrated as something that he likes to read. And it's probably been 30 years ago when we were getting Sports Illustrated here. I read an article about these two rival high schools in Ohio. And, okay, that's saying quite a bit for me to remember that from 30 years ago, because sometimes I can't remember what I did yesterday. But it was just the writing put you there. It was just so well done. So anytime you can read a good writer, I mean, I highly suggest, if you have time, to do that. And I know it's tough because we're all strapped for time, but if you can fit that in every now and then, that's really going to make you a better writer. Self-evaluate. You know, read your stories after you've written them. And it's funny, usually I used to read them when they came out in the magazine, and I think, oh my goodness, why did I write that? You know, I could have done it so much better. But try to, if you can, take a fresh look at it. Step away from it, look at it in the morning, revise it. I'm sure you will have revisions if you do that. And as Greg said, I have to agree, we're kind of you know, the same age group. Practice, practice, practice. I think I'm a much better writer now than I was earlier in my career, and I'm hoping I can continue to improve. Hopefully I can keep getting better, and now I think I've got a little bit more time to do that, so it'll be a little bit easier. And ask for feedback from others. To me, that's probably helped me the most in my career, and offer to do that for your counterparts also. I think they'll really appreciate it. So that's pretty much it. I hope you've got some questions for me. I just I had to put this picture up because of the story behind it. So this is not a real cardinal. It was about 6 inches tall, but it was just so bright red. And I happened to be at a friend's house, and I just stuck this cardinal in the tree, and I took the picture and I put it on my Facebook page. And another editor saw that, and she put it in her blog that went out to the audience, and I had to write her and say I had to fess up, even though I just put it on my Facebook page, that okay, this isn't a real cardinal. So then she had to put that out, all of her audience. But try to keep it real and just be upfront with people and let them know your own personality, because that's what's going to connect with your audience.
Okay, JoAnn, we have a question. Do you have an example of using the literary tactic with a research story?
Literary tactic with a research story. Let me think for a minute. Not right off the top of my head, but I'll look a little bit, and I can send it to Jennifer and Angie, so I will find something. I don't have an example right off the top of my head.
Okay. That was a good question.
What's a good question?
I'm trying to look through this here. Because I know this group is not quiet, so, but we get a little quiet with questions. You did a really great job of showing us a lot of different things to think about. I think one of the things that's fun is just to kind of listen to people talk about how they deal with the blank screen and things that they do to kind of overcome being stuck on a story. Because I feel like sometimes I'm trying to cram so many stories in to meet some of the needs that I have that it's hard to find that time to be creative. And you simply don't have time to have a blank screen, I guess. But
Yep. One saying that I really like, and it applies to writing a story, it really applies to life, is a balance between holding on and letting go. So when you're writing a story, you have limited time. So you want to make it as good as you can within the time constraints that you have. So at some point, though, you have to let go of that story. And I think it's probably true for a lot of you, too, that you look at a story that you wrote, some time ago, and you think, oh, I could have made that better. But just thinking and being critical of your own writing is always a good thing, I think.
yeah. See, it's on my...
Yeah.
I knew you were going there. So Casey asked again, JoAnn, could you talk a little bit more about the literary tactic? She said that she had a little background noise at the moment and couldn't hear you very well.
Well, I think it would go back to, as we said, that really works better for feature stories or for blogs where you can use that. And the question that was asked before about a researcher, maybe it's, how did that researcher feel about their research? Is there something that you can bring in about, were they really excited about it? Did they feel that it was a big breakthrough? To me, you could bring in the literary aspect in that way. Now, it's much tougher to do when you're talking about university research, but having that literary approach, I think, just with good writing, so you're setting the stage somewhat like I did with Alan Benton's story. It's nice when you can do that. It does take more time to develop it that way. I would suggest you read what Steve Werblow writes, because I think he's one of the best at giving it that literary skill, but still staying close to what the story is about. I think he's just a master.
Okay, well, we have a few more minutes. Any other questions from anyone? On the screen.
Well, I think you can email me if you think of anything, or if there's anything else that that I can help with you. Like I said earlier, I'm not an expert on this, and I know there's a lot of people out there who are much more skilled than I am, but it's been a pleasure to visit with all of you today.
Thank you so much, JoAnn, and I'm pretty sure that you are an expert, so say what you wish, but you're an expert in my book and in the eyes of many on this call today, and we just appreciate the time that you shared with us and your ideas. Don't hesitate to tweet out some of her good thoughts or share it on social, guys, and let people know that you heard her on LPC Coffee and Collaboration. And also, if you have ideas for topics or other ideas that you think would be good to discuss, we're always anxious to get your feedback and to be able to make these useful, because I know you're all busy and we want to make sure your time with us in these 45 minutes are well spent. So if there are no other questions, we'll sign off for now, and we will see you next month on Coffee and Collaboration. Have a great day.
Okay, thanks. Happy holidays, everyone.